Today's webinar is being presented by Regan Fitzgerald. Regan serves as a consultant to the Behavioral Services Department at the Johnson Center. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and Spanish from the University of Texas at Austin and has a master's degree in special education with an emphasis on autism intervention from the University of North Texas. She is a board-certified behavioral analyst with over 12 years' experience. She has had the opportunity to work with children on the autism spectrum from ages 18 months through adolescence. She has served as a moderator for social skills groups for teenagers with autism Asperger's syndrome, as well as worked as an in-home ABA therapist and consultant in Texas and California, and was a case manager at an inclusive private preschool. In addition, she has served as the only behavior analyst in one of the largest school districts in Texas, where she oversaw the district's first implementation of applied behavior analysis. Regan, in conjunction with Studio Movie Grill, initiated a program to host private screenings for children with special needs and their families, a program that is now offered to all Detroit, Fort Worth, and Houston Studio Movie Grill locations, and is now expanding nationwide. Regan is an active member in many professional organizations and has presented many workshops and presentations at various regional and national conferences. Before we begin the presentation, please note that the questions can be typed into your control panel throughout the presentation, and time permitting, they will be addressed at the end. Also, for those of you that have requested copies of the presentation, we cannot send out the presentation slides. However, we do post recordings on all of our free webinars on the Johnson Center YouTube channel. Please search for us on YouTube and subscribe to get full access to all of our recorded webinars. We are currently offering certificates of attendance for this webinar, and a link to complete a short quiz will be emailed to you following the presentation. Now please welcome our presenter, Regan.
Okay, I think everybody can hear me now. I had a little trouble there for a second. If anybody can, if you're not hearing and it's not working, please let us know, because I struggled a little bit just now, but I think I've got it. Okay, so this webinar is focusing on positive reinforcement. As you see, that SR+, that is the abbreviation for positive reinforcement. So since that's such a long word, it's just a lot to write out every single time I mention it. So this is what you'll see. And positive reinforcement truly is that important. It is almost everything that we do. It's the most important thing in behavior change. So we'll get started. First, going to try, if it works, to show a clip. Okay. I need to minimize this, I guess. Okay. This is a clip from The Big Bang Theory, if anybody has seen that show. But anyways, I wanted to start off with that, a little example here.
Would you like a chocolate? Yeah, sure. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I was not in the school. Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate. Thank you. You're here a lot now. Oh, am I talking too much? Oh, sorry. reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior. Very good. Chocolate? Kelly, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat. Actually, it turns out I can. Well, you shouldn't. There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach to dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and V.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose. No, this has to stop now. I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. We're just tweaking her personality. It's sanding off the rough edges, if you will. No, you're not sanding any. Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better? Yes, you're forbidden. Bad, Leonard. You know, using positive reinforcement techniques, I could train that behavior out of her in a week. No. If you let me use negative reinforcement, I get done before we go to bed. You're not squirting her in the face full of water. No, of course not. We're talking very mild electric shocks. No tissue damage whatsoever. Forget it. Come on. You can't tell me that you're not intrigued about the possibility of building a better girlfriend. Penny's qualities, both good and bad, are what make her who she is. You mean like that high-pitched, irritating laugh? Yes. You wouldn't prefer a throaty chuckle? You're not changing how Penny laughs. No, that would be incongruous. I was going to lower the whole voice to a more pleasing register.
Oh, sorry, guys. That girl is freaky.
Come again?
Freaky.
Freaky?
Yeah, freaky.
Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
Well, I'm willing to make some warm milk and then turn it in. I trust if you two are planning on engaging in amorous activities, you'll keep the decibel level to a minimum.
Of course.
Thank you. Unbelievable. I was just thinking we should probably turn into...
Oh, my new bed got delivered. Come over and get together, and we can stay at my place.
Maybe it's a lot of work and it's kind of late.
Yeah, but if we stay there, we won't have to be quiet.
Let's go. Interesting. Sex works even better than chocolate to modify behavior. I wonder if anyone else has stumbled onto that.
Okay, so I hope everyone can hear me now. I heard that there are some computers that people could not hear that clip, and I'm sorry. I tried to fix it while it was on, but hopefully some of you heard it. I'm going to refer back to it a little bit throughout the webinar because it's a little comical example of positive reinforcement. Okay, so positive reinforcement. If you think about that clip, you'll be able to apply it to what we're going to go over. But there's more to positive reinforcement than just giving a reward. And I think that that is something that is misconstrued in the natural environment with lay people. We start to think, oh, I'm using so much positive reinforcement. I'm rewarding the child every day. I give them stickers. I give them chips or cookies. Well, that is great and it is wonderful to reward behavior. But the main thing I want to get across to start with is that that's not the definition of positive reinforcement. Rewards can be effective positive reinforcement, but rewards can also just be rewards and not be positive reinforcement, because positive reinforcement is determined by when a stimulus is applied. So whatever it is that is being added to the equation or given as that reward is given following the behavior that we want to see increase or in conjunction with it. But the biggest part is that the behavior change. That is what determines that something is positive reinforcement. So what has to happen is that you have to see the probability of that target behavior increasing, either more frequently, if it's a behavior you want to see increase in duration, or maybe you want more intensity, you're going to want to see it increase in order for it to be effective positive reinforcement. So, for example, I could give stickers every day, and somebody would, for a child potty training, and the mom could, and the mom comes to me and says, I'm giving him stickers and I'm following the chart, it's doing exactly what I read online. But you're not seeing the behavior change, and so you're asking for assistance. The first thing we're going to look at is are those rewards actually functioning as effective positive reinforcement? And if the behavior is not improving, then it's not. So we have to look at changing our positive reinforcement in different ways in order to see it become effective positive reinforcement and not just rewards. So, rewards versus reinforcers. Rewards are things the person likes, and that we usually don't use, things someone hates when we're trying to reward individuals. But rewards don't always increase the behavior that they follow. Reinforcers are rewards that do. So if they follow, the reinforcer follows a reward follows a behavior, and you see the behavior increase, then that reward now is a reinforcer. Rewards can be different for different people at different times, in different locations, and even for different behaviors. A more difficult behavior for somebody, if I'm doing something really big for me, I'm going to expect some really, really big rewards. Or maybe, I might like, somebody else might not like. And so it might be, that reward might be a reinforcer for my behavior and might not be a reinforcer for someone else's behavior. So here's a little quote to think about, that behavior goes where reinforcement flows. And that is that's basically saying that your behavior is going to increase or improve wherever your reinforcement's going. Talking about reinforcers. So now we're going to get past the fact that it was a reward and we know it's a reinforcer. It is increasing the behavior. It is following the target behavior. So we now know it's a reinforcer. Well, there's different kinds of reinforcers. And as we saw in that video, some of this was actually discussed. You've got primary reinforcers, which are your basic, they're not have to be taught to be valuable. They are just valuable for life itself. It's intrinsic. And so that's one of the things they were getting at on that video, which was funny, is, chocolate, yes, food is a primary reinforcer, but chocolate might not be a reinforcer for everyone. That's a conditioned reinforcer. That becomes a reinforcer. And so at the end of that clip, when they were discussing sex, they were saying, oh, well, I didn't know that was a strong reinforcer. Well, it's a primary reinforcer. So it is a strong reinforcer. And not only is it strong, it's universal. Water and food are universal. So if you think of your students or children with autism, and I hear a lot of complaints a lot of times that, oh, all I'm doing is handing my child candy or cookies if I do ABA. I'm not going to reward my child with food all day. And what we want to remind everybody is that, part of your what diagnoses and defines autism spectrum disorders is that there are social deficits, and there are, and so their, interests are restricted, and due to that, they don't have as many conditioned reinforcers like everybody else does, secondary reinforcers. What we know across the board is the primary reinforcers, and that's why we might start many ABA programs with primary reinforcers of edibles or and such. So, but keep in mind, and I have other presentations on this I do, but even if we start with those primary reinforcers of edibles, the goal is to move to more secondary social reinforcers. And there are many techniques that we can implement in our ABA programs that can assist in that endeavor. The secondary reinforcers that you're going to see are things that are conditioned. That means they're taught to be reinforcing. And they're going to be different for everybody. At the beginning, we all start out, and what do our babies get? They get food, they get water, they get warmth, and a roof over their head. Well, those are the intrinsic primary reinforcers. And as time goes on and they grow and they learn, they're learning that these neutral things that are not valuable to them start to gain value. They become reinforcing. And eventually the goal is that that sense of accomplishment, that self-worth, that intrinsic value of doing good becomes reinforcing, and including pleasing others, doing well for your teachers, your parents, your elders, and you get to the point where somebody's happiness or praise towards you maintains the behaviors because that is valuable. Okay, so here's an example of positive reinforcement. Phoenicia was a 67-year-old woman who had a stroke 6 months earlier. As a result, she was unable to use her left forearm because she could not flex her left elbow. To solve this problem, a researcher set up an apparatus in which a counter indicated a number of points. Phoenicia earned points on the counter by flexing her left elbow 5 degrees. After the physiotherapy session, Phoenicia could exchange the points for money. As a result of this method, Phoenicia flexed her left elbow much more often than she had before. After 19 sessions, Phoenicia could flex her elbow as much as 70 degrees. So that is positive reinforcement. We have the points being delivered after the target behavior of flexing her left elbow, and the behavior, she could flex her elbow as much as 70 degrees after 19 sessions. And much more often than she had before. So the behavior increased, and the stimulus, the reward, was applied after the target behavior. Now let's look at the next one that's not an example. Phoenicia was a 67-year-old woman who had a stroke 6 months earlier. As a result, she was unable to use her left forearm because she could not flex her left elbow. To solve this problem, a researcher attached electrodes to Phoenicia's right forearm and administered an electric shock. Phoenicia could turn off the shock by flexing her left elbow 5 degrees. As a result of this method, Phoenicia flexed her elbow much more often than she had before when the shock came on. After 19 sessions, Phoenicia could flex her elbow as much as 70 degrees. So in this example, what we're seeing is, yes, the behavior increased, but what was happening is she was not getting reinforcement afterwards. She's wanting to escape an electric shock. So she had the electric shock was given, and then in order to turn it off, she could do the behavior. So she was basically, that is an example of negative reinforcement because, yes, the behavior increased, but not by adding a shock after the behavior. So it's stimulus presentation rather than stimulus removal. Okay, here's another one. Steven and Cody were two mentally disabled boys who seldom smiled at other people. Dr. Hopkins used a procedure in which he would take them for walks, and if they smiled at passersby, he would give them some pieces of M&M's candy. This procedure caused Stephen and Cody to smile much more often than they had before. So here you have the pieces of M&M candy that are given if they smiled at passersby, and they started smiling much more often, which was the increase in behavior. The example where it's not positive reinforcement, everything's the same, but in this one it says that Dr. Hopkins used a procedure in which he would take them for walks, and if they smiled at passersby, he would give them some pieces of M&M candy, but Stephen and Cody ate the candy quickly. There's nothing in there that talked about the behavior increasing. So yes, they were being rewarded, but they were not, the behavior was not being positively reinforced. So the next thing that we want to look at, so let's say we had one of these scenarios, and we're like, man, the behavior's not increasing. It's not effective positive reinforcement. What do we do? At this point, we have got to look at a couple different things, that variables or factors that can affect the value of positive reinforcement. And the way that what we're looking at in this aspect is how we're delivering our reinforcement or our rewards. So these are the things that we are going to adjust in order to make sure that something is positive reinforcement. The first one is we want to make sure that there is deprivation. In order for something to be effective and valuable, you've got to be deprived of it. Because if not, if you are already satiated, you already have a lot of something, then it's not going to be worth it to do what they want you to do, what the behavior changes. So that's going to give you that strong desire, that motivation. So if you're going to be using food, then obviously you want them to be hungry. If with toys, here's an example, novelty of toys. That way they're not satiated with toys. And the example I give with this is with my dog and actually my children at home. My dog never chewed anything in our house as a puppy, never ruined anything. And I strongly believe it's because I had a bunch of toys, and they were all on rotation. So I would put like 3 toys in her bin, and she played and played with them, and before she got too sick of it, I switched them out and I pulled out the other next 3 toys and did that same thing. And so I only bought a total of like 8 toys in my dog's entire life because I just kept rotating them. And she never got satiated. It was always new. Same thing with my children. I had all their toys, and they had a ton of toys. They were so fortunate, as they always are, and I would put them on rotation and keep tons of toys in the closet and just have a few down at a time and then pull the next ones out and put those back in the closet. And so their toys were always novel, and that decreased the behavior problems. The next variable is immediacy. That's really important as well. Really, we should be providing the positive reinforcement within seconds of the behavior occurring. This is a way that we can avoid reinforcing something that we didn't mean to reinforce. So, for example, if your child does something and you say, "Oh, I'll get you your reinforcer later. We'll go for ice cream later," and because we can't go right now. And so later on you're planning to go to ice cream, and on your way to the ice cream shop, your child has a tantrum in the car and is really upset about something. Well, now what happens is you have a possibility of reinforcing that tantrum behavior when you get to the ice cream shop and get the ice cream. So to avoid that, what we do is sometimes we use what we call token systems. This is used when reinforcers can't be attained immediately. When we're moving to more natural reinforcement schedules, when we're wanting to do things like earning those activities and trips and things that you would use maybe in your typical gen ed classroom. You would see a lot of kids working for class-wide systems of things on a Friday, and they work all week to earn a reward on a Friday. And a lot of the children that I've worked with autism, that would not be effective at this time. And so we wouldn't see any change. And so if I'm seeing that, then most likely it means they're not attaining it immediately enough, and so they give up. So token systems are ways that you can deliver something that serves as a token or reminder, visual, to show them that, yay, you did it, and look at where you're at, until the point when you're able to earn the actual reinforcing item or activity. Another one is size. And that is important because you want to have enough, but you also don't want to have too much, because whatever you're giving as your reward that you want to be reinforcement, if it's not enough, it's not going to be worthwhile, and so you're not going to see the motivation. But if you are, I'm sorry about that, if you give too much of an item as a reinforcer, then you can quickly have satiation and you see behavior die down. You see them stop, give up. Oh, I did it, and now I'm not seeing that behavior. So a lot of times I'll hear someone say, oh, we learned this, he mastered this, and now he's not doing it anymore. Well, sometimes it's because you've extinguished it, but sometimes it's because you're satiating and the reinforcer, the reward is not reinforcing anymore. So if we're using, let's say, edibles, for example, we want to give little pieces of edibles at a time for behavior so that they're not getting too much and they say, that's it, because we want to get a lot of repetition. We want to get a lot of practice. Same thing if we're using, like if I'm using coloring as a reward. I might have a thing of crayons, and after every behavior that I see, they get another start adding to their coloring. There's lots of ways to give little bits. I've got kids that love bubbles, and so we would be blowing bubbles, and I'd have the behavior occur. I'd blow a bubble or two. I wouldn't blow for 10 minutes bubbles, because then the child is bored, doesn't want to blow bubbles anymore, and I didn't get any practice or repetition of that target behavior. And the last one is contingency. Our rewards, our reinforcers need to be contingent on only the target behavior. If our children know that they can earn the same thing for doing other things, then they'll start to choose what it is they're going to do and what they're not going to do. So to maintain that power and that instructional control, we've got to keep the reinforcer contingent only on the target behavior. And so the acronym for this is DISC, and that's how you can remember deprivation, immediacy, satiation, contingency, or size and contingency. Okay, so now we're going to look at the importance of our response-dependent consequences. And what this means is our consequences depend how dependent they are on the response, similar to our reinforcer value variables. Martha was a 5-year-old girl who attended preschool. She seldom played with other children. Workers at the preschool began praising and admiring Martha when she engaged in cooperative play with other children. As a result of this procedure, Martha's level of cooperative play with the other children increased. So what we see here is that the praising and admiring was contingent on cooperative play only. And as a result, Martha's behavior increased and started to cooperatively play with other children. So that would be positive reinforcement. The next one is not. In this one, Martha was a 5-year-old girl who attended preschool, and she seldom played with the other children. Workers at the preschool began praising and admiring Martha more than they had before. As a result of this procedure, Martha's level of cooperative play with the other children increased. Now, it seems like that would be reinforcement because we've got admiring and praise, and we've got that her cooperative play increased. But what we don't have here is that it wasn't contingent on cooperative play. So there's something else that's in play here besides positive reinforcement for increasing that behavior. Okay, here is one. This is about using rules or instructions to help do something more often, and that is not positive reinforcement. So, students in Professor Ono's class were given a weekly quiz. The students' percent correct quiz responding on the first quiz was low. So Professor Ono began praising the performance of those students who answered the quiz questions correctly. As a result of this procedure, the students' quiz performance improved on the rest of the quizzes. Positive reinforcement. Their quiz responding increased, and it's when he was praising that performance of the students that answered correctly. But non-example, in this one, over the years, Professor Ono had given a lecture in which he emphasized 2 rules for success in his class. Study hard and pay careful attention to your work. Ono would sometimes give the rules before the students had done any work, and would sometimes give it after they had taken several quizzes. No matter when he gave that lecture, it would always improve the students' percent correct quiz responding. So here, the percent quiz correct responding increases, which is great, but it's not positive reinforcement because this is a rule that was given. It's a rule-bound behavior versus a positive reinforcement-shaped behavior by doing any sort of reinforcement or rewards after the target behavior occurs. Alrighty, so big topic here. Whenever we discuss positive reinforcement, we hear the word bribery. I hear bribery, parents say all the time to me. They're just like, bribery, I bribed him, that's how I got him to do it. I'm the queen of bribery. And I always listen to hear what it is that they did because I want to see, are they really bribing or are they using positive reinforcement? Because not always the same. Just discussing, okay, so with bribery, you're going to be hearing about the reinforcer in advance, okay? And what I mean by that is that you're going to be reminded about a reinforcer. If the child does a behavior that you want, you're reminding them that if you do it, you'll get the reinforcer because they obviously were not doing the behavior. So let me back up and clear that up. So if I said, go sit down in your seat, and my child didn't go sit down, and then I remind them about the reinforcer, and I'm like, remember, you have to sit down in order to get your ice cream, and then they go sit down, that is bribery. Because what happened there is they already were not doing what I asked. The behavior was not occurring. And the only way I got it to occur was by reminding them of what they can earn. Or it could also be when somebody is doing something that you don't want them to be doing, and you've asked them to stop, and they don't. And then you remind them that if they stop, remember, you have to stop doing that in order to get your cookies. Well, there, it's you're dangling that carrot in order to get them to stop. And what happens is that this is bribery because they weren't making a choice to do this behavior and knowing that first we do this and then we do this. They might have known that. They might have been told first you have to sit down and then you get your ice cream. But that's not, they didn't choose to do that. They chose not to do it, and what we're doing is we start offering either additional reinforcers or reminders as they don't comply. So a lot of times we'll see, I'll see somebody say, remember, we're going to go you can have a cookie after we finish this work, and they're not acting, and so they're not doing the work, and so then it's like, okay, well, when you finish it, we can get a cookie and we can do this, X, Y, Z. Go out to the playground. So basically we're upping the ante all the time. And what happens is the individual learns that. So we don't want to wait for the child to refuse to comply to then offer a reinforcer. Or wait for the child to refuse to comply to remind them of the reinforcer. That is what bribery is. Another example of bribery is when you automatically are promising a reward. And I said when giving an SD, and don't worry about that wording, that basically means when giving an instruction, if you are automatically promising a reward, that is bribery. You're basically saying that you're going to give a reward, not you're going to do this and then you get the reward. Sometimes just reminding and discussing rewards can be reinforcing in itself. And so a child learns, oh, the way I get this reinforcement is by not behaving. This really allows for a lot of negotiation and bargaining and allowing the child to decide whether or not a reward is worth it. We don't want to tease with a behavior until a behavior is performed. Bribery is good for the sense of when you need that short-term effectiveness, when you don't have time and you just need it to happen, which is why a lot of us parents do it. I have to say myself, there's many times I do not plan in advance and I'm not using effective positive reinforcement and I find myself bribing. But I can stop myself and know for next time to change that. But it basically, bribing only maintains the need for more and more positive reinforcement and more dependency on that. It doesn't lead to that internalizing desire to make a good choice. And that's what I think is the biggest struggle we run into with positive reinforcement. If you appropriately negotiate a contract, an actual behavior contract, that is not bribery. An example that when people say they don't like positive reinforcement because it's bribery, I remind them that we have a lot of things that are positive reinforcement that are not bribery. Think about your paycheck. That's positive reinforcement for our behavior. And none of us object about that, so we can't object to our children with autism needing positive reinforcement. We gain positive reinforcement to do what we do throughout our day. It's just looking at those variables that affect the effectiveness of a reinforcer. One of them is, it's going to be different for everybody. And so we have to consider that at all times. Now, negative reinforcement for your behavior may be positive reinforcement for the child's behavior. So negative reinforcement is basically when the child's behavior, your behavior is basically you want to escape something, and the way you do that is by positively reinforcing a child's behavior, and you're going to end up escaping something. So let's say your child's having a tantrum. They want a candy bar in the aisle at the grocery store. And you say, no, 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 and they whine and cry, and you're like, okay, I'll give you you just want to be quiet because you're embarrassed and everyone's looking at you and you want to get out of the store. So what is $1? You buy the candy bar. Well, now that positive reinforcement for that tantrum actually negatively reinforced your behavior, and you learn it works. It ended it. It took care of the behavior in the moment, but it's positively reinforcing that negative behavior for later on. So negative consequences, though, can also be positive reinforcement and unintentionally. So when you think about when you're reprimanding, when you get mad, when a child's scolded, many times that negative attention is attention, and attention can maintain the behavior, whether it's negative or positive. So that happens a lot of times. Let's see if this one works. This is positive and negative reinforcement. Okay, so in that example, that was an example of what I was talking about with the tantrum and the grocery store line as well. Here are examples of undesirable consequences and how they can be positive reinforcers if they function to strengthen the behavior. So they might be not what you intended, but if they function to strengthen the behavior, then they are positive reinforcers. In an elementary school classroom, research was conducted to study the effects of teacher behavior on student behavior. During one phase of the study, the teacher began disapproving of the students' disruptive behaviors when they occurred. This resulted in an increase in the level of disruptive behaviors. So here, that disapproval, that negative attention of the student's disruptive behavior, which you feel like as a teacher you've got to do. I have to teach them this is not right. I can't ignore it. But that was negative attention. It followed the behavior, and the result is it increased the behavior. Here's not an example of that. In an elementary school classroom, research was conducted to study the effects of teacher behavior on student behavior. During one phase of the study, the teacher began disapproving of the student's disruptive behaviors when they occurred. This resulted in a decrease in the level of disruptive behaviors. So here, the behavior didn't increase, it decreased. So this is actually what they were wanting to happen, but what they were wanting to happen was not actually positive reinforcement. This was wanting to decrease behaviors. So, you think about your children that have restricted interest and they're not socially motivated. Well, how are you going to find effective reinforcers? There are ways that we can do this. We can do reinforcer assessments, and there's lots of ways to do that. You can fill out interview forms and charts that will show what kinds of things the individual is interested in. Many times our children with autism, they're sensory-based toys and activities. Sometimes observing a child when they are left alone to do what they want, you can see what it is they do. It might even be some of their obsessions or their self-stimulatory behavior. Those things can also be effective reinforcers. Behaviors that are constantly trying to be decreased, we found that if you use certain access to certain behaviors, self-stimulatory behaviors as a reinforcer, as a reward, it can actually decrease also that behavior that you were wanting to decrease, because now it's they're getting access to it. And so these, reinforcers can include toys, activities, edibles, social interaction. And so when I'm doing an assessment, I'm asking questions, interviewing parents, watching the child to find things in all these different categories. Because you can then use what you find and you can build on it. If I see that somebody loves Dora, well, I'm not limited to that Dora doll that child has. I might be able to find 5 million things that are related to Dora that can be effective reinforcers, and most likely higher because they're novel. Sensory reinforcers include all kinds of different sensations. And a lot of our sensory kiddos, this is very effective for them. Social reinforcers include interacting and praise and positive attention after the desired behaviors. And if we always pair tangibles and edibles with praise and social interaction when we're delivering them, what happens is we're pairing that together, and the praise and the social interaction can become positive reinforcement. So that's how we gain that value in that praise and social interaction, is by pairing it with things that are already reinforcing. Some different activity reinforcers that, your kid includes free time, like when you finish this, then you get to go have free play. Preferred activity, participating in a preferred activity after the behavior. Earning at school, sometimes earning a teacher assistant, preferred type jobs to help out. But when you do this, things that don't have a clear beginning and end, like, oh, you can play this game. Well, if you don't set a time on that and you just deliver it and you decide, now we're done, you're most likely going to have trouble with that transition, and you might have other behaviors. So I recommend using a visual timer whenever you're using an activity without a beginning or end time for your reinforcer. Tangibles include objects or items or toys. It's a very artificial form of positive reinforcement to start with. I don't know what happened here, but so we've all found that it's difficult to identify effective reinforcers for children with autism, mostly because of the restricted interest and lack of intrinsic motivation. But our joint attention deficits and theory of mind deficits, all of these aspects contribute to that difficulty. And also sometimes self-stimulatory behaviors that they have access to at all times, maybe, that we can't stop, can sometimes be competing with the value of other things as reinforcers. Differential reinforcement. Now we're going to get into talking a little bit about providing and how you're going to implement positive reinforcement. Differential reinforcement is how you're going to be teaching through your rewards. You're going to be teaching what it is that you're rewarding, what is so good, what you're loving about the behavior. And what you're going to do is you're going to be basically giving us, basing your reinforcing value upon the importance of the behavior. And you're also going to base it upon the level of the response. So when you have a really, really, really good behavior, you're going to want the best reinforcement. When it's kind of iffy, it's not the best that someone could do, you're going to do a little less positive reinforcement. Same thing with if it's a brand new behavior, students never done it independently, big time reinforcement. While you're prompting, it's maybe a little less. And that's how we show the child, this is what we really want. This is the best. And when I say most or best reinforcement, an example would be, so maybe I give one little piece of the cookie for the prompted behaviors, and then when they finally do it by themselves, I give them a whole cookie. That would be a good example. Maybe your praise. It could be like, that was a great try, good job. And then when they do it by themselves, you're screaming and yelling and jumping up and down. But more prompted responses are going to, or lower quality responses are going to have moderate positive reinforcement. But that unexpected, outstanding performance is your spontaneous reinforcement. Okay, so here's examples of differential reinforcement. Dee was a 3-year-old girl enrolled in nursery school. She crawled, crouched, or sat 93% of the time at school and was on her feet only 7% of the time. The teachers implemented a procedure in which Dee was not given any attention for off-feet behavior. Conversely, when she was on her feet, the teachers gave Dee special attention and tried to make her feel liked and appreciated. This procedure resulted in Dee engaging in on-feet behavior almost all the time, like the other children at the school. So here, they reinforced on feet. They didn't reinforce when she was on her knees and crouched down. So that is how they did a different reinforcement for the two different levels of behavior. On the next one, though, what we see is they implemented a procedure in which whenever she was off her feet, she was made to stand in a corner of the room for 5 minutes with her back to the room. This procedure resulted in Dee engaging in on-feet behavior almost all the time like the other children at the school. So here, we weren't really reinforcing the on-feet behavior differently than the off-feet. We were just implementing a punishment for the off-feet. Now, who has ever thought to themselves, like I said, the difficulty with autism, that nothing motivates my child? I've heard it. I've thought it. But I've also been through enough experience where I've seen that there are things we can do. And I've practiced and I've seen it work. Pairing potential reinforcers with established reinforcers works. That's conditioning new reinforcers. So you want to just expose your child to all kinds of potential things and start pairing them. It'll gain the reinforcing value. Same thing you do with yourself when you want to build rapport. Think about it. Things are always better when you have rapport with an individual. How do you do that? You pair yourself with positive things and you become conditioned as a reinforcer, and that's rapport. This is how you're going to build histories of reinforcement and build trust. How do you do this? How do you condition reinforcers? Well, you're going to make yourself a signal of reinforcement, a signal for approach and communication. Present yourself with or immediately before reinforcing items or activities so that you are constantly associated with them. You build rapport by giving lots of freebies, doing things the child likes. The biggest thing is making activities more fun because you are involved. So what I've found is you can deliver bubbles to an individual and just stand there and blow bubbles. Or you can blow bubbles and you can make silly faces and you can pop them really funny and you can jump up and down. And now the activity is more fun because of what you're doing. Well, now you're becoming reinforcing. Also, not associating yourself with termination of reinforcing activities. So not always being the one that places the demands and takes the child away from positive things. I use timers so that the timer takes the student away versus me. How do you know that you're building rapport is by this student looking at you, the child staying near you, wanting to interact with you. That's how you know. And we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to see how much more we can get through. But reinforcement schedules. What this means is there's different ways that you are going to reinforce in terms of what kind of things you're teaching. Continuous reinforcement, meaning reinforcing every single time, is how you're going to teach new behaviors. But if you're wanting to maintain behaviors that are already in a repertoire and you just want to make sure you're not extinguishing it, you're going to intermittently reinforce the behavior, which means sometimes, not every time. So as an example, for continuous, every, let me see if you were giving a raisin every single time, then you are reinforcing with that raisin every time the behavior happens. But if you give a box of raisins every once in a while, every time, then that would be intermittent. Some things to think about and avoid when using positive reinforcement is instructing too often, not giving enough frequent reinforcement, not helping or prompting behaviors in order to access reinforcement. You could have it all planned out great and you're like, well, he never did it, so he doesn't get it. Well, if you don't help and prompt it, then they never gain access to the reinforcer and then they give up and they don't see you'll never see the behavior change. Reinforcers should be, as a reminder, these are the rules. Reinforcers should be reinforcing. Reinforcers should be contingent. Reinforcing means it what? It follows the behavior and increases the behavior probability. Reinforcement should be contingent on the target behavior. Using variety, always pair that social praise with the primary reinforcement. Always continuously condition new reinforcer. So every time that I say, great job, and I hand the cookie, I also hand this toy with it that maybe the child didn't really care about. But over time, being paired with the cookie, just like the praise, it can gain reinforcing value. And then, I say use age-appropriate reinforcers. Well, the reason I have as much as possible is because there are times when you have to start where the child is and gradually condition and teach more skills before they can be effective reinforcers. But sometimes we tend to not use them, and we could be. So unpredictability and novelty are important. The immediacy, that was that timing of the reinforcer. Don't forget the disc. Over time, trying to transition to more natural reinforcers, not using bribery, and finally, catch this child being good. The part I'm not going to get to, because I want to get to some questions, are the token systems. We'll save that for another presentation, but information is on here on token systems and how to implement token system. And here is a little quote. She actually said he doesn't like reinforcement. So it is that important. Okay, so I'm going to take a couple minutes to look over some of the questions that have maybe been sent in, and I will be back. Okay, so I was able to look over some of the questions that were sent, and let's see. So some of them seem to have been answered maybe later on in the presentation, and the questions might have been sent before I got to it. But the few that I'm going to answer right now, somebody asked about how do you get around all these diets, special diets, and gut problems when using edible reinforcers. And honestly, edibles don't have to be M&Ms. They don't have to be a certain cookie. If your child is on a special diet and eats, let's say, pirate booty, I don't know if you know what that is, but I know a lot of children eat pirate's booty, or maybe your child loves sweets, but they're on a special diet and so they're on no sugar, and you find these special food that they can eat that they like, and now that's your edible positive reinforcement. It doesn't have to be the one, like I said, that somebody else uses. It's all individual. So you can, a lot of my kids that are on special diets, they'll eat the healthy foods at their meals, and all those special snacks that we get at Whole Foods or at, that have some of these things, those are what we're using as their reinforcers, and it's the only time they get it is as a reinforcement. They don't get it for snack all the time. Now, if your child is on a liquid diet, it might be a little more difficult. You kind of have to get creative, and I recommend speaking with the BCBA on your specific case. Also, switching from secondary to primary. Somebody asked if they were already using secondary reinforcers and had to change and go back to primary, were they a failure? No, not at all. It means that, somewhere in the treatment and intervention, you might have punished something unintentionally, reinforced something unintentionally. At that point, you're just going to go exactly as I mentioned with the pairing and conditioning and follow those techniques and procedures in order to get to back to where you were. And then somebody else asked if using edibles, if you have to do it always at mealtime. And I actually don't recommend working on like ABA skills during mealtime. I would keep meals as meals and use the special edibles as your reinforcers at other times. And then someone else had asked if their child has a tantrum, do they need to keep saying no and stop, and or if they should just ignore the tantrum. And really, that's going to be dependent on the specific scenario. I couldn't answer that without, the specifics, but as a whole, if the behavior is showing that it's being maintained or increasing, and what you are doing is saying no and stop it and giving a lot of attention, then I do recommend trying to ignore it and extinguishing it instead. But you can always, along with that, reinforce the positive behavior you are wanting, and that is the differential reinforcement. So I hope that helps and everybody learned something, and see you back another time. Thanks.